It is my distinct honor and pleasure to welcome Dr. Anneliese Singh today. Dr. Singh serves as the Associate Dean of Diversity and Equity in the College of Education at the University of Georgia, and she co-founded the Georgia Safe Schools Coalition and Trans Resilience Project. She is the author of the guidelines published by APA for psychological practice with transgender and gender nonconforming clients, as well as several books, such as Affirmative Counseling with Transgender and Gender Nonconforming Clients, Qualitative Inquiry in Clinical and Educational Settings, and the upcoming Queer and Trans Resilience Workbook. Dr. Singh is a South Asian, Sikh, multiracial, queer American. She passionately believes in and strives to live by the ideals of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s beloved community, as well as the Audre Lorde's quote, "Without community, there is no liberation." Perhaps one of the most timely keynotes for this conference, given what happened this week. So as some of you are aware, two federal agencies of the President's administration on Wednesday evening notified the Supreme Court and school officials across the nation that the federal government will no longer require that transgender students get access to bathrooms and locker rooms that match their gender identities. Official statements on this matter echoed the White House view that the issue of access of students to intimate facilities at school, such as toilets, showers, and locker rooms, is a matter best left to state and local governments. This switch in policy focuses on the interpretation of a phrase in a 1972 civil rights law banning discrimination on the basis of sex in federally funded programs. That law is known as Title IX, and the Obama administration in 2015 became the first national government to take the view that this phrase also barred discrimination on the basis of gender identity. That policy was extended nationwide last May, and this week sort of taken back. In this presentation, Dr. Singh will describe how recent debates about gender-neutral bathrooms have shaped trans-negative societal discourses in the United States and reignite community-based trauma. Using historical context and histories of trans liberation and civil rights movements, Dr. Singh will explore how divided discussions about trans people and bathrooms have the potential to move all of us towards learning more and more about our own gender training and other socializations around race, ethnicity, disability, class, and other identities. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Singh.
How's everyone doing? Does it feel like a bit of a homecoming this year? I think every year it kind of feels like a homecoming, but I want to give, before I get started, a special shout out to the conference coordinators. So can we give them a round of applause? Can we get on our feet and can we do that? And can you take that in? Awesome. Cool. I mean, every year is important, and I think this year for many of us feels especially important, and there's a lot that we've been talking about all through the conference related to that, but I really feel grateful to be here today, and my talk is called, What If Trans Liberation Is for Everybody? Moving from affirmative to liberatory counseling with all genders. And this talk is inspired by many different theorists and sheroes, heroes, and T-rows of mine. You might remember bell hooks. Don't get me started on bell hooks and like Beyonce. I have some feelings about that. I mean, come on now. She wrote a book called, Feminism is for Everybody, and really got us thinking about that. And when we talk about trans folks, we tend to get really focused on bodies, right? So I think in my work, I've started to move from affirmative counseling to liberatory counseling, and I'll see how that goes. It's a learning process for me. One thing I do want to say before we get started is that I do have like a potty mouth. We will talk about potties, and we'll talk about some body parts. So there's your trigger warning. So please take care of yourself. And I say that really seriously as a traumatologist. But as we get started, I do want to say thank you for inviting me. This space has been really one of restoration and hope and connection. So it really does feel like family. So thank you so much. And for the last few years, every single presentation or talk or any interaction I have with folks, I dedicate to 3 people in my life who are not here anymore. And I always get emotional when I talk about it, because I think when you do this work, as we heard from Janet Helms earlier today, I mean, people die. Bad shit happens, and it's beyond not cool. But I just want to call the names of Jenna Thomas on the left, who is a traveling nurse. She was white. Traveling nurses, do any of you have traveling nurses in your life? They make some bank. She had all the financial class privilege in the world. She lived in the Bay, very supportive area, and she overinjected insulin, killed herself because somehow the world still wasn't affirming or a place she felt like she could thrive as a trans person. And the middle is Asam Sadiki, Muslim, South Asian, grew up in Montgomery, Alabama, and really just had to fight so hard to affirm his gender and his sexual orientation. Also completed suicide a few years ago. And then my best friend in high school, Janine Grimes, at my wedding, which was a full-on illegal wedding in Georgia in 2012, which was very interesting. But I don't know what gender pronouns Janine would use today, but I do know as we went to high school together and kind of grew up together. Yeah, her birthday's coming up. Never went to the doctor to get reproductive organs and things like that checked out, and really was like very afraid of physicians. I think that, they would be on the they/their spectrum. I don't know for sure, but died of ovarian cancer, what we call ovarian cancer. And they looked about 9 months pregnant when I last saw them in the hospital. So it's not fun for me to get up here and say these things to you. And I allow myself to have some emotions to just remind us and kind of get us all in the room that, this is really, this is a serious thing. And as Riddy was talking about, like what's going on right now, it's getting a little more serious even this week. So I guess what I'll say about Jenna, Janine, and Asam is that this time that we spend together, I'd like to dedicate to them. So this one's for you. Where we're going to go today in our short amount of time is to look at some current and historical perspectives around trans lives and gender in general. I am a super fan of the top 10 list, so you will leave here with a top 10 list of things that I kind of think maybe incorporate trans, not only counseling from a liberatory perspective, but gender liberation in general. And that's informed by the multicultural competencies, awareness, knowledge, and skills. And if you haven't seen them, a few folks and we revised the very significant multicultural competencies that I've used my whole life, feels like. We added to that triad of awareness, knowledge, and skills, and added action. So the American Counseling Association, we revised the multicultural counseling competencies there. And then I've really fought for affirmative counseling and counseling in psychology, but the whole time I was doing it, I felt completely out of integrity and out of congruence because I'd always been dreaming of this liberatory place. So, I just kind of share that because I think when we do social justice work, sometimes we're in the in-between where it's like, what am I doing and why am I doing this? But somehow we know it's important and we're dreaming of another place. So hopefully you'll dream with me a little bit today. I'm going to start with the stars, and that's going to feel a little bit weird, and it's okay. I'll come back to it at the end. But I grew up in New Orleans, and one of the things that I remember about New Orleans was you couldn't really see the stars. There was a lot of light pollution. And then there was one year when my family, I had an Indian Sikh dad and a white Southern mom, and we lived in El Paso for a year. So we drove from New Orleans all across the state of Texas, which is a long freaking drive. And I just remember what it was like when you saw the stars. It was like I think if you in the room, I know we've got a lot of New Yorkers in the house, right? So I don't know if you can see the stars, but do you know, like raise your hand or indicate in some way if you know that feeling I'm talking about when you look at those stars and it just feels so magical, like something really cool is about to happen. Well, I remember looking at that blanket of stars and really wondering about what does it look like, or what would one individual star look like if you got really close to it. And, I really thought I was on track to like working in a planetarium or like going to NASA or like shooting out into space. Somehow I became a counseling psychologist and I trained as a counselor, which sometimes makes me feel like I'm in outer space. But I've been spending the last 15 years of my life studying trans resilience. And when I say resilience, not just regular old resilience, the resilience that allows us at like, what time is it? 4:27 to still be here and be together, bounce back from some stress, right? But I've really studied and endeavored to study the resilience that trans people experience in response to oppression, right? And discrimination. So it's a very different resilience. It's not a white Western, like, let's just get out of bed resilience. It's like, holy shit, how am I going to get out of bed? And how do I really move through these spaces? So I'll come back to the stars by the time we close today. But if you had told me 15 years ago I was going to talk to you about toilets, I would have said, no, I don't believe you. So, I think what Riddy was saying about the changes this week as of Wednesday, I've been talking about toilets a lot for a long time. And for folks in the room who do trans rights work, raise your hand, and just everyone else kind of look at them because these are like our heroes, sheroes, and heroes too. These are some of the most intimate places we spend in our lives, right? And with the withdrawal of federal guidance for trans students in schools, we do have a pretty serious situation, right? But it's kind of like, I'm going to say it, the Women's March, right? So we do need to get out in the streets and all that stuff, but trans students, they're still protected under Title IX. Title IX hasn't gone away, the U.S. Constitution, there are some other rights, and some states have policies and additional rights. And I'm not saying we shouldn't be outraged, we should, and we'll talk about that. But I don't want us to be tricked, right? We've been thinking and talking about bathrooms for a long time. So trans students, non-binary students, people across the lifetime need protection in society, period, right? Because this type of stuff goes on, right? So I don't know if you can see this, but this was at the University of West Georgia, and this really, I'm sure at Teachers College you have those awesome queer and trans groups that are just like fucking shit up and like tearing stuff up, exploding things and revisioning things. Well, they did that with the bathrooms. They put these signs up that said, this bathroom has been liberated from gender. Doesn't that make you want to go home and liberate your own bathroom of gender? Psych, guess what? It already is liberated from gender in your home, right? Ta-da! They always just remind us of what we already know, is what I love about young folks. But here's what Lance Dakota, Carchiopolo, I'm going to call that person's name, said. I just ripped this bull crap off, doing my best to stop the further liberalization of the University of West Georgia. And then this is the land we're entering again. We've been here, folks, right? We know that, but here it is again. So on the left, we have the beautiful sign, get your agenda out of my restroom, as if there's not already an agenda going on, right? There are only two genders. I think everyone here probably knows that's not right. Give me some snaps if you know that's not right. Okay, perfect. I know this audience. This is family. And then on the right, transgenderism is a mental disorder. This one gets a little tricky. Uh-oh. That's where we're kind of fucking up a little bit, because what's in the DSM? Okay, so we'll talk about privilege as we go on. And then we've got this awesome resistance that's happening, right? I mean, it's just people are resisting and have been resisting. These are folks in North Carolina. Did we vote on your bathroom? Probably not. Really people calling attention. And I think cisgender people, probably more than ever right now, taking to the streets, speaking out, wanting to get educated, right? Wanting to do something different about this place that we spend so much time in. So I'm like, really? I'm really going to talk about bathrooms with you all today? I am, but I'm going to talk about them in hopes that we can get to a different place and change the conversation, because I do think we need to talk about bathrooms, because sometimes we're well-meaning and we make signs like this. I don't know what this half person is on the right. I do like the words. That's pretty rad. But sometimes we get it wrong, right? When we're really trying to get it right. And I think that's okay, because we need to have a learning journey, right? There's a journey around this. I mean, is it better than this? Is this better than this? I mean, and so I think the way we start to think about this is to make it really personal, like your thoughts in the bathroom. So yes, I'm going to talk to you about your bathroom experiences for a moment. When you go into a bathroom, what are your thoughts? I gotta pee. What was that in the front? I get in, get out, right? I won't tell you what my experience was like in the Atlanta airport bathroom today. I was like, wow, y'all need to stop rounding and hustling people up and start like cleaning the freaking bathroom. Bad things have been going on in airports right now. We know that. But usually our thoughts about bathrooms are like, what's the stinkiness quotient? Is there enough toilet paper? Can I get in and get out? I just gotta pee. Can I do that in peace? I mean, when we don't have peace in the bathroom, we know how that feels as well. I'm not going to go there. So I refuse. There are limits I have. And then we get to these weird places, right? Where literally in bathrooms, we're talking about body parts, right? And this is why I gave you a disclaimer, right? So that those things we call a penis and a vagina that, I don't know, sometimes we get wrong, because the things that we think should look like penises and vaginas maybe aren't penises and vaginas. Maybe there's something else, or maybe someone calls what you call a penis their vagina, and that's awesome. It's rad. But, it gets into this idea of who gets to have access to have this most intimate act, right? And so it squarely puts us in this place about privilege, right? So this is like, I think, 80s style. If you think this is bad, just wait until they take away your bathroom privileges. Does anyone remember this cartoon strip in the paper? I was a child of the 80s. And so then all of a sudden we're thinking about cisgender privilege, right? And how we use that cisgender privilege is huge. And when you have these conversations with people, I mean, we're with family right now, right? But then how do we talk to people who don't get it, right? And who really believe this, that there's this trans menace. And we know that the trans menace has been in the media for a long time. It's always the trans person, the queer person that goes crazy, kills people, serial murderer, all that. But people really do believe, especially cisgender women, that they're going to get hurt in bathrooms, right? And why is that? Does anyone... Yeah. Yeah. Yes, that's part of the story, right? In addition to us just having this very binary view of gender, there's this whole thing about safety and fear, right? And so here we are working with this limbic system, this reptilian brain that's like, oh, hell no. And then, you have to break down some facts around, okay, let's talk about, because, we can access some research in here. We got that privilege. Well, let's talk about the number of times that trans people hurt other people in bathrooms. Yeah, we have zero research to prove that or provide any evidence for that. I know I'm not supposed to say prove and all that. But we do have tons, reams, horrible amounts of evidence of trans people getting hurt, killed, having terrible experiences in bathrooms that don't involve the toilet paper, right? It's one of the most unsafe places for folks. So, again, we're in this dichotomy again of us and them. And trying to get people to think. And I think we should use research. I think it's good to do that. I think it helps start conversations. Research isn't everything. But what I found, at least in Georgia and some of the other places I've worked, that this whole gender-neutral bathroom kind of brings me back to the gender-neutral sign. I don't know what that is. I know we got some gender-neutral bathrooms here. I use some. Gosh, that one down the hall, like the heat, it's a little too much. They need to turn down something is going on in there. It's too hot. It's like, yeah. But I think I'm going to tell you, you may not think you may live in a state where you feel like, we got this, it's fine, everyone's safe. But I want to challenge you to think about, what if we don't have this, right? And I'm bringing a perspective of Georgia to you. But even if you feel like you're living in a safer state, I would ask you to think about, how people really feel about single stall bathrooms. So the way I've learned to talk about single stall bathrooms is, they are great for trans and non-binary folks, right? But remember the curb cuts when they started cutting the curbs so people who live with disabilities and use wheelchairs could use that curb cut? Like all of a sudden, lots of people started having access. People in freaking heels, people who maybe had a temporary disability they were living with, people who just, were tired, right? So all of a sudden, access for a lot of people use curb cuts, right? So we know that when we have single stall bathrooms, they can be literally good for everybody, right? People living with disabilities, and it doesn't always have to be the one image of someone in a wheelchair that is static, right? But it can also be a place where people who have to inject medicine, who really are used to being viewed in a certain way, when they're trying to do these things in a bathroom, the most private place you can get. It can also for chest feeding, right? So if, we're not supposed to do this legally, right? Have the lactation room and the bathroom together, but we all know that it happens all the time, right? So single stall bathrooms can really help with that. And Steve Bannon, hello, news alert, even for white, cis, straight guys, your rights are protected too. Because sometimes you may need to change a child or tend to things that are easier to do in single stall bathrooms. I just took a new position at my university. I became Associate Dean of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, which has been a whole trip and a whole nother presentation. But I got to make a bathroom sign as one of my first things. I was like, ooh, this is gonna be fun. And, I didn't put a half person up there, but I did make sure it said this bathroom is for everyone. And that tried to make that accessibility just kind of embedded into the bathroom without putting trans and non-binary people on blast. But I think this is 45's toilet in Trump Tower, right? I know New York is awesome, but y'all have Trump Tower. We don't have Trump Tower in Atlanta. So I refuse to do a selfie in front of Trump Tower. With middle fingers up, of course. So if we do dare to step away from the toilet, right? So we need to have that type of conversation with people. We've got to have that basic research-informed accessibility. Let's talk about it. Get people to think about what they do in the bathroom, right? But I think if we keep going that way only, we're going to stay in this place where we're just asking and begging and just hoping for one day things to change. And so I think we can look at counseling and psychology and the other helping professions to kind of see why this is a problem. Like in counseling and psychology, people have been gatekeepers and kind of this medical model of this is how high you have to jump to be trans. We've really made an identity of trans being only about body modifications. We've kind of created this narrative, this dominant narrative that it's all about body modifications or that someone is born in the wrong body. And then we've tried to move to these more affirmative positions that, wait, what? Trans folks know themselves? Isn't that what we think when we work with our clients and students and other people we help? That trans people are in charge of their mental health, their education, their settings. They're in charge of their lives, and that there's no one way to be trans, right? And that I've added this in here because I hear this a lot. I call it the pity quotient, like the Mr. T thing, pity the fool, poor trans person, you're never gonna be in a relationship. Wrong. That's so wrong to say and wrong to put on people. Trans people have healthy and loving relationships all the time, and that's a huge amount of resilience. So I'm going to take you on a little kind of dogleg turns before we get to liberation, but I wanted to come back to the theme of today's conference, the next few days conference between Flint, Michigan, right, and what's going on in trans counseling approaches. So I saw this headline, and it was of a news story when Flint was first being revealed, and it said, "Systemic racism going back decades," oh my God, "is at the core of problems that caused a lead-contaminated water crisis in the majority Black city of Flint, according to a Michigan Civil Rights Commission report issued Friday." Right? That's why we're here at this conference talking about systemic racism and systemic forces, right? But I think the connection between trans counseling, trans lives, and what was going on there is this systemic approach, right? So we got to talk about bathrooms and the discrimination and the lack of information there. We got to talk about allies, but then we've got to add a big old question mark, right? Like, do we really need more allies? And how do we even feel about that word? I know this is a family where we've already troubled the idea of ally, right? You know, people can be like, "Oh, I want to be a trans ally because I have like a sister or a cousin, a child, you know, a parent." You can be a trans ally for altruism, like, "Oh, it's just the right thing to do. We got to help those poor trans people." Or you can do it for social justice, right? And I think that puts us in the direction of liberation. So I think it becomes important to kind of slow down and ask ourselves, what would liberation actually even look like? And I always go to the dictionary to kind of check myself to see like, what do I think about that? And in the dictionary, it says the act or process of freeing someone or something from another's control, the act of liberating something or someone, the removal of traditional social or sexual roles or attitudes. Have you in this room ever experienced liberation? I know I see some heads nodding. Do you know what it feels like? I mean, some people have been feeling it in the streets. A lot of folks in the room have been taken in the streets. Raise your hand or indicate in some way if you've been taken in the streets, a little more than usual. Okay. Do you know when you're in the streets and you have that feeling and it feels like something good's going to happen? Is that what it is, or is it something else? Like, how do we know when this is happening? I mean, this is kind of a conversation I want to invite you into. I don't know that we know what it looks like, right? So I think this is a quote that's shared in social justice communities quite a bit, and I wanted to share it here to remind us and kind of get us. We're about to get to this top 10 list, but there was an Aboriginal Indigenous person in the land we now call Australia, Lila Watson, who said, "If you've come to help me, you are wasting your time." She was talking about well-meaning white folks who wanted to help the Indigenous people in their land fights for their land rights. But she said, "If you've come to help me, you're wasting your time. If you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together." Let us work together. But again, it gets us to this place, well, what is shared liberation then? You know, and I love this artist in this quote, "No pride for some of us without liberation for all of us." It was kind of geared at kind of queer community, right? But again, I had to put in a blank slide here. What does shared liberation look like? Do we talk about it in our training programs? Do we feel it with students and our clients and our colleagues and our families and even those people that voted for 45? Like, how do we do this? And so I've started to generate and kind of think about some ways that we might be able to do this. And I don't know if I have this right. So this is kind of a conversation with you all. But I think one of the things we have to do is recover our memory, our historical and historical memory. This is Christine Jorgensen. Does anyone recognize this person, indicate in some way? In the 1950s, her case was highlighted in the media. She was the first person to go overseas to access what we now call, and we should call, gender affirmation or confirmation surgery. If you've ever read her biography, she really didn't want to be in the media as much as it was, but she came to embrace that role as a way to say, I want to liberate my people. But she was really kind of thrust onto center stage. But the problem with Christine's story is we start to think that gender, when it comes to trans folks, is just about white and Western perspectives, right? And it's a recent thing. It's a trend or a fad. But then we start to look at real history, real her story, and real T story, and we realize, where are my historians in the room? Indicate in some way. Oh, none? Oh, I see some. Okay. I know y'all are always here. You end up in these fields and help us learn, right? So on the left top, we have the Mahu of Hawaii in the Pacific Islands. We've got the Two-Spirit people on the left and the right of the land we now call the United States. We've got the trans folks of different countries in Africa, the Hijra of Pakistan and India. Did you learn about these folks in your history and books growing up? Do we start our classes on gender with these stories? Because these were stories of gender transgression and gender value, where actually trans people were seen as sacred. Not all the time. I don't want to sugarcoat that story. It's just not cool to do that either. But this is not a trend or a fad, right? But what happens when we only start to talk about folks like Caitlyn Jenner, right? We forget this is a photo from one of the last times I was visiting my family in India, the Hijra, who are now a decimated community, I think, in South Asia, but still come when the mornings of weddings and births and offer blessings. So history repeats itself. Caitlyn Jenner said what? I mean, this is a pretty white and Western idea of what beauty is, right? What it means to be a woman. Caitlyn Jenner said, trans people shouldn't look like a man in a dress. So we have internalized cisgenderism to look at too, right? So I think if we aren't looking at how we actually start talking about the beginnings of gender, and if you get dizzy, don't look at the slides, I'm gonna go back. This is all of our gender history right here. For every single person in the room, this is your legacy. Welcome. And if you don't know it, please learn it, because guess what? This gives you every license to be the exact gender you are right now. Give yourselves a round of applause for that, right? I'm asking you to give yourselves a round of applause, seriously, because we aren't, I don't think, going to get to a liberatory place with trans folks and counseling if we don't, in educational practices, if we aren't reflecting on our own gender. If we're not reflecting our own gender and we don't have the models and the history to help us do that, we don't really know how to do that, right? So from an intersectional perspective, what do white cisgender men learn about gender growing up? What are some of the stereotypes people tend to hear? Be tough. Man up, right? And then you start adding people of color there, Black men, Latina, Latinx men. What happens then? What do those folks hear? Be a macho, right? No vulnerability allowed. And then Black women, women of color, what do they hear? Shut up, be strong. You're too much. How many of you were at Dr. Helm's talk this afternoon? I mean, she talked about this, right, in relation to experiences of violence. As someone who grew up with an Indian dad who told me, you know what, Anneliese, you can do anything you want to in the world. But then he wanted to arrange a marriage, which I'm not against arranged marriages. I just want to say that's a whole nother presentation. But I was like, wait, I'm queer. How are you going to arrange that? I might be interested. I don't know. I think it could be helpful. I did find the love of my life a few years ago, so I'm good. But it was by OkCupid, so it was kind of arranged. But I learned that being a woman was really informed by race, ethnicity. I learned to hate my belly, my body. I've had to fight crawling towards body love in my life. I've learned to critique every inch of who I am related to my gender. And sometimes it still happens, you know. So what I'm going to ask you to do in a keynote presentation is I'm going to ask you to turn to your neighbor, and I want you to take a little bit of a chance. This is a challenge by choice situation, so you've heard my trigger warning, so you don't have to engage in this activity if you don't want to. But I'd like you to take 3 minutes with someone nearby, your neighbor, your new best friend, or your old best friend. And I want you to share the time and talk about what has been the impact on your own gender intersectionally, right? Related to disability, related to class. What are the messages you've heard? Because sometimes we're used to talking about that out here at a presentation, in class. We know how to work with our clients and our students, but we forget that this is us, right? So you ready? Set, go. You got 3 minutes. I'm timing you. Welcome back. I'm from the South. Be polite and thank your partner. Good home training. All right. It's never enough time to do that, right? Did you indicate in some way if you found something new as you shared? Okay. A few hands. I mean, this is like our basic level training, right, is to do this stuff, but how much time do we come back and talk about the impacts on us right now, right? Does anyone want to share? Yes.
We discussed the idea of, well, I was discussing the idea of my gender being received in the shadow when I was younger as something I was constantly told, you don't do that, girls don't do that, girls can't do that, girls shouldn't do that. And it became a thing that I denied for like 10 years. Because if I denied it, then I could climb trees and say, whatever, I'm not a girl, whatever, I'm up a tree, fine. Or I'm not that kind of girl. And that was like enough. And then like figuring out how much of that was reinforced everywhere I went.
Right. So I don't know if everyone could hear that, but really talking about the restrictions of gender in those messages, right? And yeah, we know how education and learning works, right? We know we all got a little, I'm going to get psychodynamic on you. We all know we have a little kid inside who's still struggling with those issues, right? And so again, we're trying to be like a good trans ally. But I 100%, I don't know, I'm totally could be wrong. But I just have a sneaking suspicion that's not going to get us to trans liberation counseling, is if we try to be a good counselor and do affirmative counseling. I think we're going to become really good counselors and helping professionals and educators if we can really heal those parts. And I dared to say heal, right? So this deep reflection, I think, from a liberatory perspective is not just that master's level kind of thing you wrote, which is like, okay, I am, and then you write all the identities and then you figure out the messages, but you learn to identify how that really impacted you and how you still carry that in your body. That will help you be, at the baseline, I think, at least an affirmative person in a trans person's life more than anything. I think the other thing that liberation psychology and Paulo Freire's work and different liberation theorists give us is this idea of problematization. Say that 3 times fast. And I'm not talking about the academic kind that's just taking people down to take them down. I hate that. I'm talking about the problematization that asks who benefits. It's a real sociological question. Who benefits? Who benefits from diagnosis? Big Farm and us and us. I don't like it. There's no racism disorder. There's no like sexism disorder. I mean, we could go to town diagnosing number 45, but I haven't heard the real diagnoses because they're not there, right? They're not in that big book. They're not even in the cultural section. So I think we can problematize our practices at every turn. We start from the beginning with gender. All of genders, we all have a gender. We reflect deeply, not only on our history, we go find it, and then we reflect on our own gender, and then we ask ourselves who benefits. Right now, we're at a weird time in trans counseling. There's a real rush to get trans affirmative counselors, and I dig it. I'm all about it. And I think there's a danger that it's the hip thing to do, or, no, like pro bono counseling, like access. Those are the reasons, like, are trans people involved, right? Are you thinking about conceptions of what being a woman or a man means to people and how they're carrying internalization around that? Then there's consciousness raising, right? I think a lot of that is going on right now in a different way in different communities. We've got a lot of mostly white women communities waking up in a lot of different ways, which is pretty rad to watch, sometimes annoying, and often, we got to make space for that. It's important. People are going to a different level. And I say that to my white sisters with some love because, I think consciousness raising is a very personal and intimate community. And whether it's white women, trans inclusive, people need their spaces to be able to do this waking up. And kind of thinking about, an activist in Atlanta, his name is Juan, he passed suddenly a couple of years ago, but he had this phrase. He talked about, when we fight, we win. And so it's a different way of consciousness raising. It's not just awareness, knowledge, skills. It's adding that action piece of like, you know what, when you do this, we're going to win. Doesn't that make you feel more empowered? And like, I feel more hopeful when I do that, to go back to Georgia. And to talk about it intersectionally, right? What happened to Trayvon Martin, to all the deaths of Black men are integrally related to what goes on in trans lives. They're just linked. That's intersectionality, right? I think we've also got to uplift. You notice we're at number 6 in the top 10 list, just as a check. We've got to uplift trans and cis counter narratives, right? So kind of trouble the idea of what a safe space is. Laverne Cox on the left there is, she's holding the sign on the street. This is not a safe space. She's saying that, right? I mean, we know that because when you look at trans surveys, the most recent one in 27,000, 41% of trans people say they've attempted suicide at least one time in their life. That's like all you all. The average percentage in the U.S. is 4.6%. 41%, 4.6%, 41%, 46%. When we fight, we what? We win. So let's say it again. When we fight, we win, right? So that's why we uplift these counter narratives, right? And counter narratives have been in every community intersectionally. Like, I'm from New Orleans, so the thing called Hurricane Katrina that Angela Davis taught me to call Hurricane U.S. government, people, were pissed off because this had happened before in Black communities. That's why Kanye West got up and said, like, George Bush hates Black people, because there was a counter narrative that was already going on that gave people resilience, right? So there are counter narratives about gender in both trans and cisgender communities. And I think we need to uplift that. I'm going to take a deep breath right now because we're going to talk about pussy. That's the first time I've said that in my career. Toilets and pussy, toilets and pussy. Okay, I gave you your trigger warning, right? So the Women's March that then became the Women's and Social Justice March, right? There are a lot of signs out there, awesome signs. I was having flashbacks to the 90s, like the ovaries and like the ovary with the fist and as the fallopian tube and all that. The pussy hats, and what's defined as a vagina. What a vagina looks like. I'm not trying to down the pussy. This is my career right now. I think I'm kind of loving it. Is this really being taped? Thank you. I'm getting some love from up there. Thank you. I'm starting to sweat. Our bodies are not anyone's property. Our bodies. This is for everyone. Women, trans inclusive. That's, I think, what Bell Hooks was talking about, centering the margins. Raquel Willis, African-American trans woman, amazing, came out of Atlanta roots, now in the Bay Area. They always steal our people. You do too, but they come back. Cut off, added late to the Women's March lineup, and then cut the fuck off. The march had to start. If you center the margins, it works. When we fight, we win. And that's why we take sides. You know, this quote, Paulo Freire, washing one's hands of the conflict between the powerful and the powerless means to side with the powerful, not to be neutral. Again, we're social justice family. We know this quote. We've used it in a million presentations. But do we teach people how to do it? Do we teach people how to take sides on these issues? So it's not just a trans conversation, but it's a gender liberatory conversation. And taking sides can look really different. Sometimes it looks like interrupting, like someone might have wanted to interrupt me in this keynote. That would have been fun. But I want to show you something that just happened at the US Path conference in Los Angeles. I was there at the beginning of February. US Path is the US version of the World Association of World Professional Association of Transgender Health. Totally has hurt trans people in so many ways, is really changing a lot of what they're doing. But it's been harmful. And there's a person named Kenneth Zucker who ran a clinic out of Toronto, Canada, whose clinic was shut down a little while ago. And he would do what I believe is conversion therapy or reparative therapy with gender nonconforming children, gender expansive, gender creative children, having them like dress in clothes, play with toys according to their assigned birth sex. Not freaking cool. So guess what happened? Watch this. Oh, wait, don't watch that.
I think before we move forward, actually, we should acknowledge the elephant in the room, which is that for many transgender participants in this conference, we're seeing Dr. Kenneth Zucker on the program. Before we go any further, I just want to say that I think it's completely ridiculous that WPATH, it's disgraceful that WPATH has allowed this man to present. For reparative therapy for transgender youth, which has done innumerable amounts of damage to youth that I know personally, as well as many others. And yeah, well, I'm speaking, so we're in free speech world. So I just want to acknowledge that that's disgraceful. That is incredibly harmful that he's being allowed space to speak at a transgender conference, and that we're in a position to listen to. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I am interrupting. That is correct. I'm interrupting this in order to say.
Let's give a round of applause. Don't you feel like, yes?
The researchers who have done absolutely harmful research to our communities is being allowed to speak. That is ridiculous. It is not inclusive of our community, and we're allowing a bunch of white men to run this show without our input.
Come on, sis. Come on, sis.
Notice I didn't cut her off. We can interrupt our own spaces. It doesn't always have to look like that, right? But we should interrupt, and not just around trans issues, but, you know, we've got to start this conversation now. We really can't wait. Why? Because when we do those types of activities, when we kind of head more towards a gender liberatory perspective, I think together we are powerful. And I love this sign. It's from the San Francisco March. Where are my San Francisco peeps in the room? Yeah. I was at the first trans march out there. It was great. But I love this sign on the right. It says, "Stop trans oppression now, damn it." I was like, yes, I love young people. Together we are powerful, because when we fight, and so that is, I think, a major part of trans liberatory counseling is interrupting, taking to the streets, but sometimes decolonizing our mind as well. I think the number one place I want to end is that I've kind of got a hunch that trans liberatory approaches I've shared with you already are about healing for all, and then notice I have the period there. And so again, the work becomes really personal. We start with the history, all of our her story, all of our T story, and the idea that what happens in our lives, in our families, in our communities, in our classes, with our clients, in our schools, in our universities, in our world, in our globe, when we stop accepting things, And when we do that in a beloved way, I think we don't have to shame and blame people to do it. I mean, Dr. Kenneth Zucker, yeah, I'm all about shame and blame there. That needed to be stopped. But sometimes it's just healing. And it's saying, I'm no longer accepting the things I cannot change when it comes to my own gender experience. I am changing the things that I cannot accept. So I'm going to ask you to do this very quickly for 1 minute. I want you to go back into your pair, and I want you to talk to your pair about one thing related to your gender that you are changing because you do not accept anymore. And you can start doing that now. All right, welcome back. That was a quick one. How did that feel to do? I mean, it's kind of what we've been talking about the whole conference, right? Things that we're not going to accept anymore, things that we want to change, right? So I'm going to ask us to say this together. We're going to say the I'm no longer accepting thing together because I think it's powerful when we do it together and remind ourselves as a family that this is what guides us. You ready? Set, go. I am no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I am changing the things I cannot accept. So now I want you to look around at your community when you say this. You ready? I am no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I am changing the same that I cannot accept. Now I'm going to ask you to get out of your seats. Yeah. If that is in your purview, please do that. Dude, we have to have some fun when we do this work, right? And some reminders, right? Fist in the air. I am no longer accepting things I cannot change. I am changing the things I cannot accept. Look around, last time. I am no longer accepting things I cannot change. I am changing the things I cannot accept. When we fight, awesome. There are 7 billion stars out in the sky, they say. There are actually a lot more. But there are about 7 billion humans out there. And on one of my youth studies, one of the young people, when I asked them to define their gender, they said, I am my own gender. Hello. I was like, oh, yeah, I'm my own gender, too. Yeah, I am. Yeah. And then I started to be like, oh, I'm my own gender. And so imagine that. There's 7 billion gender stars in the world. It's pretty cool. I think that's how we shift the conversation of liberation. The best news is all we have to do is look up. Or get on YouTube and remind ourselves of what the stars look like. I'm just saying, some of us live in cities. I want to just remind you that I dedicated this time to Jenna, Assam, and Janine. I fully want us all to work in a world where people like them and me and all of you get to live in a world that we can thrive in. How awesome is that? And I'm just so thankful to be here with you today. So give yourselves a round of applause.